The bitter wind howled across the barren plains as Kira's small scout ship plummeted through the atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across her control panel, bathing her blue-tinted skin in angry red glows. She knew this was no accident. The ship's core systems had been sabotaged before she left the mothership. Emergency landing protocols engaged, the ship's computer announced in its emotionless voice. Kira's four-fingered hands gripped the controls tightly, her large eyes scanning the rapidly approaching ground for any suitable landing zone. The harsh landscape below offered little comfort, just rocks and sparse vegetation, as far as she could see. The truth hit her harder than the failing engines. The Council had wanted her dead. Her discovery of their secret mining operations, their slavery of lesser species, and their plans for expansion had marked her for elimination. They hadn't even bothered to make it look like an accident. The sabotage was obvious, a clear message to anyone who dared question the Council's authority. The ship screamed as it cut through the air, pieces of the outer hull tearing away. Kira activated her crash restraints, watching as the ground rushed up to meet her. The impact was devastating. Metal twisted and broke, and the cockpit filled with smoke and sparks. Pain shot through her body as the restraints dug into her flesh, barely keeping her from being crushed by the collapsing structure. When the world stopped spinning, Kira found herself hanging upside down in the wreckage. Blood, silver in color, dripped from a deep gash in her arm. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps. At least 3 of her ribs were broken, and her left leg wouldn't move properly. The ship's emergency systems sparked weakly, trying to maintain life support. Outside, the planet's twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and red. The temperature was dropping quickly. Without her ship's protection, the cold would kill her before morning. Kira pulled herself free from the restraints, falling awkwardly onto what used to be the cockpit ceiling. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body. She needed to find shelter and medical supplies, if any had survived the crash. The emergency kit was crushed, most of its contents ruined. She managed to salvage a small medical scanner, some bandages, and a half-broken heat rod. Her communication device was completely destroyed, along with any hope of calling for help. Not that anyone would come. Her people never returned for the wounded or weak. It was one of their most sacred laws. Only the strong deserved to survive. As darkness fell, strange sounds echoed across the plains. This world had predators, and the crash would attract them. Kira forced herself to move, limping away from the wreckage. Each step was agony, but staying meant certain death. In the distance, she spotted what looked like ruins, remnants of some ancient civilization. They would have to do. The journey was slow and painful. Twice she had to stop and hide as large, shadow-like creatures prowled nearby, drawn by the scent of her blood. The ruins were cold and empty, but they offered some protection from the wind and wildlife. Kira found a small corner where 2 walls met, creating a defensible position. Using the heat rod, she managed to warm the space enough to keep from freezing. As she wrapped her wounds with shaking hands, Kira finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She was alone in a hostile world, badly injured, with no way to call for help. Her own people had tried to kill her, and even if she survived, she could never return home. The realization broke something inside her. Silver tears rolled down her face as she curled up against the cold stone wall. All her years of loyal service, her dedication to her people's advancement, her dreams of making their society better, none of it had mattered. The Council had marked her for death simply for discovering the truth. As exhaustion and pain overtook her, Kira closed her eyes. Perhaps it would be better to just let go, to accept the fate her people had chosen for her. In the darkness of an alien world, wounded and alone, she had given up. She didn't know that fate had other plans, or that help would come from the most unexpected source. James Miller adjusted his combat helmet as he trudged through the rocky terrain, the weight of his patrol gear feeling heavier than usual. His scanner beeped steadily, monitoring the border zone for any unusual activity. The morning air was crisp and thin, typical of this harsh frontier world. Something on his scanner caught his attention, an unusual heat signature about 2 kilometers east. Protocol demanded he report any anomalies immediately to Base Command, but curiosity got the better of him. After 6 months of mundane patrols, anything different was worth investigating. The wreckage came into view as he crested a hill. Metal debris scattered across the ground, still smoking in places. James raised his rifle, moving cautiously toward the crash site. The design was definitely alien, sleek and organic compared to bulky human ships. Most importantly, it wasn't harvester technology, the hostile species humanity was currently at war with. Base, this is Scout 7, he reported through his comm. Found crashed alien vessel, design unknown. Requesting permission to investigate. Static crackled before the response came. Negative, Scout 7. Mark location and return to patrol route. First contact protocols are clear. No direct engagement with unknown species. James lowered his comm, but didn't turn back. Something about this felt different. The crash was too recent, and the damage pattern suggested sabotage rather than mechanical failure. Someone had wanted this ship to go down. Following tracks in the dust, he noticed silver droplets, blood, but not like any he'd seen before. The trail led towards some ancient ruins nearby. His training told him to follow orders, but 6 years in the Scout Corps had taught him to trust his instincts. The ruins were quiet except for the wind whistling through broken stone columns. James activated his helmet's thermal imaging, scanning the shadows. There, a heat signature, faint but present, huddled in a corner. He approached slowly, rifle lowered but ready. What he found made him forget all about protocols and regulations. The alien was humanoid but clearly not human. Her skin had a bluish tint, and her large eyes were unlike anything he'd seen before. She was badly injured, silver blood seeping through makeshift bandages. Her breathing was shallow and labored. When she noticed him, she tried to move away, fear evident in her expression. The movement caused her obvious pain, and she slumped back against the wall. "Easy there," James said softly, knowing she probably couldn't understand him. He slowly removed his helmet, showing his face. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien watched him warily, clutching what looked like a broken piece of technology. Her wounds were severe. Without proper medical attention, she wouldn't survive long. James keyed his comm again. Base, Scout 7. Situation update needed. "Go ahead, Scout 7. He hesitated. Regulations were clear about alien contact. Best case, he'd face court-martial. Worst case, he could trigger an interstellar incident. But looking at the injured alien, remembering the obvious sabotage to her ship, he couldn't just walk away. "False alarm at crash site," he reported. "Just some old debris. Continuing patrol." "Confirmed, Scout 7. Maintain regular check-ins." James turned back to the alien. "Okay, let's see what we can do about those wounds." He slowly opened his medkit, showing her the supplies. "I'm James. You're safe now." The alien watched as he laid out bandages and antiseptic. Her large eyes studied his movements, fear slowly giving way to cautious curiosity. When he gestured to her injured arm, she hesitantly extended it. As James began cleaning the wound, he knew he was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His career, possibly his freedom, would be forfeit if he was discovered. But looking at the gratitude in those alien eyes, he knew it was worth the risk. He didn't understand then that this moment would change not just their lives, but the relationship between their species forever. Sometimes, the biggest changes in history start with one simple choice: the choice to help someone in need, regardless of who or what they are. The first few days were the hardest. James had managed to move Kira to an abandoned storage bunker he'd discovered during previous patrols. The underground facility offered better protection from the elements and prying eyes, but trust remained a delicate issue. Kira flinched every time he approached with medical supplies. Her large eyes followed his every movement, muscles tensing whenever he got too close. James noticed how she would grip nearby objects, ready to use them as weapons if needed. He couldn't blame her. He'd probably react the same way if their positions were reversed. Communication was their biggest challenge. James tried speaking slowly, using gestures to convey his meaning. Kira would respond with sounds unlike anything he'd heard before, clicks and whistles that made his translator software useless. On the third day, breakthrough came through pain. Kira's wound had become infected, causing her silver blood to turn a darker, almost black color. The fever made her delirious, and in her weakened state, she finally allowed James to properly treat the infection. "This will hurt," he warned, showing her the antiseptic spray. "But it will help." He pointed to the infected area, then to the medicine, making that getting better gesture. Kira watched him with glassy eyes, too weak to resist. When the antiseptic hit her wound, she made a high-pitched sound that made James wince. But she didn't pull away. Hours passed as James worked, cleaning the wound and applying proper bandages. He noticed strange markings on her skin, not natural patterns, but what looked like deliberate scarring. Some were fresh, probably from the crash, but others were old. While treating her, James talked. He didn't know if she understood, but the sound of his voice seemed to calm her. He told her about Earth, about his family back home, about his 6 years in the Scout Corps. He described the war with the Harvesters and how humanity had learned the hard way not to trust every alien species they met. To his surprise, Kira began responding. Though he couldn't understand her words, her tone carried meaning. When he mentioned family, she made a bitter, harsh sound. When he talked about war, her posture changed. She seemed to understand all too well. By the 7th day, they had developed a crude form of communication. Kira could mimic some human words, though they sounded strange in her vocal range. James learned that pointing to objects and saying their names helped her learn faster. "Water," he said one morning, holding up his canteen. "Water," she repeated, the word whistling slightly through her different mouth structure. "Good." He smiled, and she attempted to mirror the expression, though her facial muscles worked differently. Through their basic communication, James learned bits about her people. They were called the Drift, though the way she pronounced it sounded more like Drift. When he asked about her injuries, particularly the old scars, her demeanor would change. Fear, anger, and shame would cross her alien features. The turning point in their trust came during a supply run. James had to leave for several hours to maintain his patrol schedule and gather more medical supplies. When he returned, he found Kira had cleaned the bunker using her good arm, arranging his supplies more efficiently. She had also drawn something on the wall. A star map, he realized. She pointed to one star, then to herself, then made a slashing motion across her throat. The message was clear. Her people had tried to kill her. James sat down beside her, careful to maintain a comfortable distance. "You're safe here," he said slowly, pointing to the bunker, then to himself. "I will help." Kira studied him for a long moment, then reached out and touched his hand. The first time she had initiated contact. Her skin was cooler than human temperature, smooth like polished stone. "Safe," she repeated, the word hissing slightly. "Help." In that moment, something shifted between them. Trust, fragile but real, began to grow. Neither of them knew it yet, but this trust would be tested sooner than they expected, and their survival would depend on it. The warning came at dawn. James's perimeter sensors picked up multiple signals moving with purpose, not the random patterns of local wildlife. Through his binoculars, he spotted them. 3 Drift scouts, their blue skin almost glowing in the early morning light. "They search," Kira whispered from behind him, her improved English still carrying that distinct whistling accent. "For body. For proof." James watched as the scouts methodically swept the crash site. Their movements were precise, military. These weren't rescuers. They were hunters making sure their target was dead. "We need to move," James said, packing essential supplies. "They'll find the blood trail to the ruins." Kira's wounds had healed enough for her to walk, though her left leg still gave her trouble. She helped gather their supplies, her movements quick but silent. 2 weeks of hiding had taught them both the value of speed and stealth. The scouts were good, but James was better. He'd spent years learning to disappear in terrain like this. Leading Kira through a series of narrow canyons, he laid false trails. A scrap of bloody bandage here, a footprint there, all leading away from their actual destination. "Why you risk?" Kira asked as they rested in a shallow cave. "Your people, they punish helping alien." James checked his scanner before answering. Some things are more important than rules. He didn't mention the court-martial that awaited him if discovered, or the possibility of being labeled a traitor for harboring an alien during wartime. Instead, he focused on their survival. The scouts were getting closer. They had technology that could detect recent movement, and their search pattern was tightening. James needed to think like them to stay ahead. "Your people," he said to Kira. "How do they track?" Kira's large eyes narrowed in concentration. "Heat. Movement. But most." She touched her nose. "Smell. My blood, different from world. Easy follow." James smiled. Finally, something he could work with. He pulled out his field kit and removed several small canisters. Time to give them something else to smell. Using the canisters, James created a series of chemical trails. The compounds would mask Kira's distinct blood scent while providing false trails for the hunters to follow. It was an old trick he'd learned fighting the harvesters, adapted for their current situation. They moved through the night, using the darkness to their advantage. The scouts had split up, covering more ground. James led Kira to higher ground, where the wind would disperse their scent. From their vantage point, they watched one of the scouts discover a false trail. The alien's reaction confirmed James's suspicions. They weren't just making sure Kira was dead. They were eliminating evidence. "They fear," Kira said softly. "What I know, what I can tell." James checked his ammunition. He had enough to fight if necessary, but that would bring more attention. His daily reports to base were already raising suspicions, his patrol routes too consistent, his check-ins too brief. A close call came near midnight. A scout passed within meters of their hiding spot. James and Kira pressed against each other in a narrow crevice, neither daring to breathe. The scout's scanning device swept past their location twice before moving on. When dawn approached, the scouts finally withdrew. But James knew this wasn't the end. They would return with better equipment, more personnel. The hunt was just beginning. "We can't stay in this area," he told Kira. "They'll expand their search." Kira nodded, her expression determined. "I slow you down. Should leave." "Not happening." James cut her off. "We're in this together now." Looking at her, James realized something had changed. The frightened, wounded alien he'd found in the ruins was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had found a reason to fight back. They gathered their remaining supplies and headed west, toward the mountains. The hunt would continue, but now they had something the scouts didn't: a partnership forged in trust and survival. Neither of them knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. In their mountain hideout, time moved differently. Days blended into weeks as James and Kira learned more about each other's worlds. The small cave they'd found offered natural protection and a view of the valleys below, perfect for spotting approaching threats. During the quiet hours between patrols, they shared stories. Kira was fascinated by human concepts that her people considered weak or foolish. The idea of helping injured comrades particularly confused her. "You're warriors," she said one evening, watching James clean his rifle. "They return for wounded." "Always," James replied. "No one gets left behind. It's one of our most important rules." Kira's expression showed confusion. "But weak ones, they slow group, danger to all." James set down his weapon. "Strength isn't just about physical power. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone else." He watched understanding slowly dawn in her large eyes. Her own people, the drift, had evolved in harsh conditions where resources were scarce. Their society eliminated weakness to survive. But in doing so, they'd lost something essential. Kira proved to be a quick learner. She absorbed human language rapidly, her whistling accent fading. In return, she taught James about drift technology. The devices she'd salvaged from her crash were far advanced in some ways, primitive in others. "Your people," she said, dismantling a broken scanner, "they fight different. Harvesters, stronger, but humans, unpredictable." James nodded. "We adapt, find new ways. That's how we'd survived." One night, while they shared their dwindling rations, Kira revealed more about why she'd been targeted. Her voice trembled as she spoke of discovering secret facilities where her people conducted cruel experiments on weaker species. "Council says evolution demands it. Strong consume weak." She touched one of her old scars. I questioned. Became threat. James felt anger rise in his chest. "That's not evolution. That's just cruelty." "Yes," Kira agreed. "I see now. Watching you, learning human ways. There is strength in." She searched for the word. Compassion. Their conversations were interrupted by regular security checks. James maintained his patrol schedule, reporting normal activities to base while carefully hiding any signs of Kira's presence. But he knew their time was running out. One afternoon, Kira was examining James's field medical kit when she made a discovery. "This medicine," she said, holding up a vial, "similar to drift healing compound. But yours, kinder, no pain." "That's the point," James explained. "Healing doesn't have to hurt." Kira was quiet for a long moment. "My people, we believe pain makes stronger, but pain also makes cruel." She looked at James. "Humans strange. You help enemies, care for weak. Yet you survive, grow stronger." James smiled. "Maybe because we don't see everyone different as an enemy." Their understanding deepened through shared dangers. When a local predator attacked their cave, they fought together, combining human tactics with drift technology. When James fell ill from a local virus, Kira used her knowledge of xenobiology to create a cure. But the most profound change came in small moments. Kira learning to laugh at James's terrible jokes. James mastering the complex clicking sounds of drift language. Two beings from vastly different worlds, finding common ground. "What happens?" Kira asked one night, "when others find us?" James had been avoiding this question. "Depends who finds us first. My people might understand, eventually. Your people will not stop hunting," she finished. "Council fears change. Fears what I know, what I become." Looking at her, James saw how much she had changed from the wounded alien he'd found in the ruins. She stood straighter now, moved with confidence. The fear in her eyes had been replaced with determination. "Whatever happens," he said, "we face it together." Kira nodded, using the human gesture she'd learned. "Together," she repeated. Strange word. No meaning in drift language. Now, I understand why humans use it. Neither of them knew they would soon be testing the strength of that understanding, as both their worlds were about to collide. The warning sirens shattered the morning calm. Human patrol ships roared overhead as drift vessels descended through the clouds. 2 months of hiding had come to an explosive end. James grabbed his rifle, checking the perimeter sensors. Multiple contacts, both human and drift forces. He turned to Kira. "They found us." Kira's hands moved swiftly over her salvaged equipment. "Council ships, elite hunters." Her voice carried both fear and determination. "They'd burn everything to hide truth." The cave entrance exploded in a shower of rocks. Through the dust, armored figures appeared. Human soldiers, weapons raised. "Scout Miller," a familiar voice barked. "Step away from the alien." "That's an order." Commander Roberts, James's superior officer, moved forward with his weapon trained on Kira. Behind him, more soldiers secured the cave. "Sir," James stayed between them and Kira. I can explain. Explain harboring an alien during wartime. Roberts cut him off. Explain going dark on patrols. The court-martial will love this. Before James could respond, another explosion rocked the cave. Drift warriors dropped from above, their advanced armor gleaming. The cave erupted in chaos as both groups raised weapons. Stop. Kira's voice carried a new authority. She stepped forward, holding up a small device. This evidence shows everything. Both human and drift forces hesitated. The device projected images, secret facilities, illegal experiments, council corruption. Kira's voice steadied as she explained in her now fluent English. Council fears this truth, sent hunters to kill me. She gestured to James. He showed different way, showed strength and mercy. The cave grew quiet as more images played. Evidence of the council's plans to manipulate both humans and drift for their own power. Proof of their willingness to sacrifice their own people. Commander Roberts lowered his weapon slightly. Miller, you knew about this. Not everything, sir, James replied. But I knew she needed help. Sometimes regulations have to bend for what's right. The drift warriors conversed in rapid clicks and whistles. Their leader stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal features similar to Kira's. The council's corruption runs deep, he said in accented English. Many of us suspected, but had no proof. Another explosion, bigger this time, shook the mountain. Through the cave entrance, they saw more drift ships arriving, council vessels, armed for destruction. They'll destroy everything, Kira warned. All evidence, all witnesses. Commander Roberts made a quick decision. Miller, get that evidence to headquarters. Rest of you, defensive positions. We're about to have company. The cave became a fortress as former enemies found themselves fighting side by side. Human tactical knowledge combined with drift technology created a formidable defense. James turned to leave with the evidence, but Kira caught his arm. I stay, she said firmly. Must face them. Show council their way ends. Not alone, James replied, checking his weapon. Roberts interrupted. Both of you go. That evidence is our only chance to prevent full-scale war. We'll hold them here. The cave shook again as council forces began their assault. Humans and rebel drift warriors moved in practiced formations, covering each other's weaknesses. As James and Kira prepared to leave through a back tunnel, Roberts called out. Miller, still facing court-martial. But good job, soldier. They ran through the mountain passages as battle sounds echoed behind them. The evidence had to reach both human and drift authorities before the council could bury the truth. Your career, Kira said as they moved. Your life. All risk for helping me. James smiled grimly. Some things worth more than career, like preventing war, like doing what's right. Behind them, the battle rage. Ahead lay uncertainty, but they'd learned to trust each other, to bridge the gap between their worlds. Now they had to hope others could learn the same lesson. The fate of both their species would depend on what happened next. 3 months after the mountain battle, James stood before the Joint Species Council. The newly formed chamber held both human and drift representatives, a sight unimaginable just months ago. The evidence Kira had gathered sparked revolution within drift society. The corrupt council members were removed, many facing justice for their crimes. More importantly, it opened dialogue between two species that might have otherwise gone to war. Scout James Miller, the human chairperson, announced, "Step forward." James advanced, his dress uniform pressed and perfect. The court-martial charges still hung over him, but today's hearing would decide more than his fate. Kira sat among the drift representatives, her posture proud. She wore the marks of a truth speaker now, a new position created after the old council's fall. Her eyes met James's, and she gave him the slightest nod. Your actions, the chairperson continued, violated multiple regulations regarding alien contact. However, these same actions prevented an interstellar war and exposed critical threats to both our species. The drift speaker rose, his voice carrying the musical quality of their language. Among my people, change comes slowly. Yet in weeks, we have seen centuries of tradition questioned and reformed. Because one human chose compassion over protocol. James stood straight as they reviewed the events. The battle at the mountain had become legend among both species. Human and drift warriors fighting together, holding off the corrupt council forces long enough for the evidence to reach both governments. Commander Roberts, still recovering from his wounds, had testified how former enemies became allies in that cave, how artificial barriers broke down in the face of a common cause. The charges of court-martial are hereby dismissed, the human chairperson declared. Furthermore, Scout Miller will be promoted to serve as our first joint species liaison. Murmurs of approval filled the chamber. James caught Kira's smile. She'd helped plan this, he realized. There is more, the drift speaker announced. We propose a new initiative. The strength we witnessed, when our species work together, must not be lost. The chamber's screens lit up with plans for a joint training program, human adaptability combined with drift technology, a force dedicated to protecting both species' interests. Will you lead this program, Liaison Miller? The drift speaker asked. James looked at Kira, remembering their conversation in the cave months ago. About strength and compassion, about finding better ways. On one condition, he replied, that it be led jointly, with truth speaker Kira. The chamber erupted in approving sounds, human applause mixing with drift whistles of acclaim. Later, outside the chamber, Kira approached James. Joint leadership, she said, amusement in her voice. You still surprising. Learn from the best, he grinned. Speaking of surprises, I heard you're teaching human medical teams about drift biology. Kira nodded. They learn fast. Like you. See value in understanding differences. They walk together through the new joint facility. Around them, humans and drift worked side by side, learning from each other. The fear and mistrust that might have led to war was being replaced by curiosity and respect. Remember when you asked why I helped you? James said, stopping at a window overlooking the training grounds. You said some things more important than rules, Kira replied. Now I teach this to others. Below them, a new class of recruits, both human and drift, began their training. Each species bringing their unique strengths, learning to complement rather than fear their differences. We make strange team, Kira observed, watching the recruits. The best kind, James replied, because we prove what's possible. They stood together, watching the future they'd helped create unfold. A wounded alien and a human soldier who broke the rules. Their story had become a symbol of hope for both species. The old Drift Council had feared change, had tried to maintain power through cruelty and division, but they'd failed to understand what James and Kira had learned in that mountain cave. True strength comes not from dominating others, but from helping them rise. A new chapter was beginning, and they would write it together.